Good morning and welcome to Energy Horizons. I'm the only one with the bar chair here, but the drinks will be served later in the evening. Thank you very much for joining us. As you've already probably discovered, we're trying to do things slightly differently this time around. Every time we try to do things differently, but this time, this session that we're starting off with is particularly interesting because you will hear less and speak more and hopefully learn from each other a lot more. We tried to structure Energy Horizons in a manner that you wouldn't have to listen to long speeches of the plenary hall. You will have some of that, but we want to actually get to know each other a little bit better, get intimate, and understand what we're all doing. This particular session starts off with a masterclass on linking the energy transition to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you actually think about it, Goal 7, Energy for All, and Goal 8, which includes decent work for all, are absolutely critically linked, as are all the other 15 SDGs. But when we say decent work for all, or when we say energy for all, what do we really mean? Is it just a job, or what is the quality of the job? Is it just a job for a male, or does it open up opportunities for all? Equally, what does an energy connection mean if electrons are not flowing into your home? Or what does clean cooking mean if you're not refilling your LPG cylinders? So to understand these linkages across the ecosystem, we want to have this particular masterclass, and my colleagues and at CEEW and colleagues from other institutions will facilitate this conversation. But just to put it in context, think about it. 5 years ago, and you will hear more about this later in the day and tomorrow as well. 5 years ago, India had just about 20,000 jobs in renewables. Today, we have nearly 100,000 jobs in renewables. But guess what? That's utility scale renewables. India has also generated about 95,000 direct jobs in the decentralized renewable energy sector. And on top of that, the indirect jobs in the informal sector is more than 200,000, impacting about 450,000 jobs across the economy, across the rural economy that relies on clean energy. So when you start applying this multiplier effect, you see this happening, unfolding right in front of our eyes. And we can take some gratitude together for shaping this energy transitions as we do our day jobs. But on top of that, we also need to think about what would be the role of distributed energy in linking up to a centralized electricity system. And again, this is something you will hear through the next 2 days about what is the future of the electricity system. So in particular, when we think about distributed energy, we have to think not of it just as a substitute for the centralized system, but as a complement. But that sounds nice and glib when I say this in a hotel in New Delhi. What does it actually mean in practice to hook up the two, to make the past become a convoy for the future? So those are some of the questions we want to discuss. We have a terrific set of facilitators and panelists today. We've got Rana Adib, Executive Secretary of the REN 21, has flown over, thankfully got the visa on time and is here. Dr. P.C. Maitani needs very little introduction. He is, I think, not just for MNRE, but for the entire renewable energy sector, the technical doyen who's been around and seen the entire spectrum unfold and is still helping us shape the future. Michael Renner from IRENA, thank you very much for joining us. Some of the issues that we'll be discussing. He is, as my colleague Kanika was telling me, he is perhaps one of the most leading authorities on the subject of jobs and renewables anywhere in the world. So you'll hear from him. We've got Vaishali Sinha from Renewables. Renewables, as you all know, is the leading renewable energy company in the country. But in addition to just the utility scale projects that Renew invests in, there's a range of other social engagements that Renew is also involved in. And that's the linkages also we would like you to talk about, Vaishali. And of course, Dr. Praveen Saxena, the CEO of the Skills Council for Green Jobs. We've been partnering with with Dr. Saxena and his team for several years now, and it's because of that partnership that CEEW, NRDC, and other partners were able to actually count the jobs, make the quantitative case for what this energy transition means, not for lights and fans and fuel, but what it means for jobs and livelihoods. So that's really it from me. I'm now going to request Divya from Power for All to open us up with a presentation, and then my colleague Abhishek will facilitate this discussion. Once again, welcome to Energy Horizons, and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Arnab. My name is Divya Kotadil. I work for Power for All. Power for All, for those of you who are unaware, is a global campaign to accelerate the deployment of DRE solutions as one of the best solutions to universal energy access. As part of our work, we introduced the Powering Jobs campaign about a year ago, and the objective of that was to advance fiscal and institutional support for decentralized renewable energy, skills and training, and to ensure inclusive human capital needed to power SDG 7. We did this through three steps. One is awareness, to create awareness towards positive social impact that energy access can have on employment. The next is advocacy, to growing support within target institutions for this financial policy and programmatic support, and then activation to demonstrate how these new opportunities can connect women and youth to more jobs. And as part of this campaign, we also launched the Powering Jobs census earlier this week, which was to establish a baseline to connect SDG 7 and SDG 8. The research scope of that covered technology, which was a range of technology including pico-solar appliances, solar home systems, productive use appliances, standalone systems, and mini-grids. And we also looked at job types, both formal and informal, in the direct job space, productive use space, and indirect jobs. What it did not include was induced jobs in the DRE sector. The sample size that we interviewed across 3 countries, which was India, Kenya, and Nigeria, was about 130 survey respondents. In India, the survey respondents, although there were only 36, the market share is such that it covered about 80% of the DRE sector. And we looked at job estimates and projections, the workforce characteristics, which included gender balance, youth participation, job function breakdown, recruitment challenges, wage and compensation, and level of engagement. And then we came up with a list of key recommendations for the DRE sector on local capacity building and how to include more women in the workforce. Coming to the job estimates, this looked at 2017-18, and what we found was that the scale of DRE in the direct formal workforce was already almost at par with utility scale solar. And in addition to direct formal jobs, there was also a significant employment within the indirect and productive use job space. In terms of breakdown of the kinds of jobs within the sector, we found that a large percentage of the jobs were in sales and distribution, and as well as in management and business administration formed a significant employer within the space. And the average retention was about 30 months across the board for full-time direct formal jobs. The participation of women the in the formal job space was fairly low. However, youth participation was high, and a lot of the companies we spoke to expressed a strong interest in hiring more young people within the sector. In terms of projections, we found that through the data analysis that the direct formal jobs will almost double in India, and the informal jobs will also grow, but probably not as fast as the direct formal jobs. Technology is also sort of linked to the analysis. So we've within the solar appliance and solar home systems companies, they would be the major employers within the space, within the sector, providing the largest number of jobs, but both formal and informal. Under high mini-grid penetration scenario, which is about 500 megawatts, the jobs would almost double. And if through the government schemes like Kusum that wants to deploy solar water pump systems within the agricultural communities, that will also emerge as a significant employer. We looked at two scenarios within the mini-grid penetration. If there was within a low scenario, which is about 60 megawatts, and the high penetration scenario, which is about 500 megawatts, and you can see the difference in the jobs and also the kind of skills required. So the higher the mini-grid penetration scenario, more management and business as well as operations and maintenance skills would be required. And finally, the study found that, as I said, within a high mini-grid penetration scenario, the jobs would almost double. There would be about 10,000 additional jobs because of solar water pumping. And the skills gap that would need to be addressed would depend on how the sector evolves. There would be an expected shift from sales and distribution to operations and maintenance. And lastly, there is an opportunity for employing more women within the sector, both for direct formal jobs as well as informal jobs. Although right now, informal jobs, there is a high participation, but there is an opportunity for the formal job scenario for more women to be employed. And there's already a high willingness to employ young people, so that will definitely continue. Sorry, so I haven't really gone through the entire report, but you can find the report on our website and download it and get back to us with your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. And as she mentioned, Power for All is doing this across the world, not just in India. We are very privileged to have partnered. I'm now going to hand over to Abhishek, who's going to facilitate the discussion. Abhishek, many of you already know, but those of you who don't, is one of the leading authorities on energy access in the country, and perhaps, I hope, soon in the world. Energy access is an absolutely critical developmental imperative, and huge progress has been made in India in the last decade. So I would request Abhishek, who's built up the energy access program at the council, to take over and facilitate this discussion. Thank you, Abhishek.
Thanks, Arnab. Good morning, all. Divya has made my life a little easier. We have got 3 minutes extra. I won't spend much time in terms of introducing the panel, as Arnab has already introduced a very stellar panel to all of you. So let's just dive straight into discussion, sort of building up from where Divya has left us with in terms of the key conclusions that are coming or emerging from the study. And as Divya mentioned, this is, of course, we did an India deep dive here in the last 5 to 7 minutes, but similar trends are sort of emerging when we look at even Kenya and Nairobi, where a similar study has been undertaken as part of this initiative. So maybe I'll first sort of start with some of the Indian context and then weave in the international perspectives, as we have very interesting sort of panelists who both are very well versed with India, and then there's some very well versed with international experiences. So maybe Dr. Mithani, if I may start with you, sir. You have seen the space for fairly long. You have looked at both in multiple capacities, large-scale renewable energy, as well as a lot of the decentralized deployments over the years. And we know that one of the critical things that sort of differentiate the two, among many other factors, is the employment potential that the two have. Like every megawatt of large-scale solar is creating X jobs. Every megawatt of small-scale solar is probably creating 6 to 8x jobs. And given the country where we are today, where the employment is becoming an emerging concern, we know that unemployment rates are probably one of the highest over the last few decades. How do you see, if at all, MNRE or the broader government looking at this, do they see renewable energy as an engine towards jobs, towards livelihoods, and particularly also looking at the jobs, like where are they coming? DRE probably is going to bring us a lot many more jobs in the rural areas, in the peri-urban areas. Whereas, of course, utility will also probably at times will bring jobs in the rural areas, given where the installations are being deployed, but not of the permanent nature. So, maybe let's just start with like how is government looking at DRE versus utility scale, or DRE and utility scale when it comes to the job story associated with them.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you very much. Morning to all. See, this is no, I put it from the Government of India perspective, and otherwise it is a common thing that there is no competition between DRE versus centralized. These are the part of a continuum. If we see 3-decade journey of the renewables, the way it has moved in the country, that initial focus was to providing the microcurrents and lighting services where the access was really a main issue. Over the period, the ecosystem has changed significantly, and renewables have become a mainstreaming, become more and more competing with the grid-based centralized power generation systems. So our objective has become two. Not only that we provide the decentralized system, but as well as to replace centralized system as quickly as possible to decarbonize our energy systems. That is evident from our commitments which we have done under the either under the climate regimes or other regimes which are looking for the global commons at a different place. And renewables technology and innovation have made it possible over the period. Now we all know that how renewables are replacing that. And if you look at the growth story of India last 3 years, the addition of renewables is much more than that of the fossil fuel-based power generation systems in the country. And if you go by our projections for next 5 to 7 years, the way things are happening, it will still be much faster and accelerated over the period. So your point number one, that yes, jobs are increasing in the centralized one, and they are increasing at unprecedented rate. Due to the two reasons, one is that the economy of scale has prevailed, they have become more competitive, and our mainstream power managers have also realized that how the grid augmentation has to be taken into, and in what way the new manner that the grid which was heretofore was developed for the centralized kind of systems has to be augmented to take more and more renewables into the state. That is one part of the story. Now look at the kind of ecosystem in India has been for the decentralized renewables. What does it mean by decentralized renewables? Is in the 3 components, I can put it that way. One is for the lighting services in those areas where grid has not been impacted. Second is those areas where the small systems can be set up at your roofs and other places, even grid is there and hook to them the grid. And third is for the cooking energy access in a big way. And fourth, maybe for the productive applications in the village systems, whereby you can renewables make a lot of sense for the industry and small villages industries to create the jobs at the local level, not only for operation and maintenance, but using renewables for productive applications as well. Well, I'll go one by one on all these 4 lists. Policies are there and policies matter. We all know. Government of India has been making policies which are available in the public domain, and programs always translate into the activities, and activities translate into jobs. If there is a program for solar rooftop, then this program will lead to deployment will lead to jobs. This is a full chain, but ultimately it all emanates from the policies. But how it impacts? So I'll give my 3 experiences in that. Few years back, a decade back or so, I visited Ajanta, and there I had an old friend who used to do in biogas that time, long back. And then I thought I shall reconnect with him. I went to that place. And good old days, he was doing biogas 100 to 200 systems in that area. And there was a scheme of Government of India that if you can operate and maintain biogas for a few years, you will be getting that much money. So he made an economics that if he maintained 100 plus biogas plant on a regular basis, construct and maintain, then he can get a very good livelihood descent, which you say SDG 8 at that area. So I listed in 2 time scales. One is 2 decade back, one is 1 decade back. And I realized that when the first visit I did, he was just full of anxiety that whether it will be survival, will be there or not, and then he started working on it. Next time when I went to him, I saw that he not only was doing biogas, but he had integrated the solar also in that, small lighting systems. His kids had grown up, and in that area itself, he was giving a decent education to the kids. And without anybody's under this, he has created a network whereby without any government support, he was providing services to the people. Cooking meals in the form of setting up biogas plant, despite the fact that Government of India programs have reduced significantly over the period in that area, but it made a difference. That was the time when around 200 plus thousand systems were being set up. Now over the period, Ujjwala took over and biogas became the back burner. But still, people in that area were using that for, along with, as a complement to the LPG replacement, which just mentioned that what are the issues of that linked. So it is a full synergy from the transition from which we are looking from the biogas to that another domain. That's case number 1. Case number 2, which I will go that 4 years back, I visited a remote part of Himalayas, which is around 30 kilometer track. So after 12 kilometer of track, this was a steep track, it would take around 18 hours to track that. There is a small village, and then agglomeration of some small villages. In the year 2002, one of the government agency had set up some solar system there for the lighting purposes in that villages. Around 40 villages, 40 households at different locations. And thereafter nobody turned up. But trackers used to go in that route, and over the period they learned how to do it. And I realized that not only in that village they learned that how to operate and maintain it, but one shop was opened at a place called Himat around 50 kilometers far, that which was providing that kind of services to all the places. And 2-3 people in the village itself was knowing that how to maintain these lighting services at the decentralized level. An informal market beyond government subsidy and government support was created around 50 villages in that area. 4 or 5 people were working on that. That is the second example. So these things were fulfilling both the arms, decent jobs as well as livelihood at that place. Third example, sitting with us, boom. They started with mini grids, let us see, and I had last month only I discussed with Shah on that how it is working. And the solar rooftop they are doing in a big way. People at that area, instead of going for the jobs here and there, despite government programs are changing at very fast rate in the solar rooftop ecosystem. Earlier there was a subsidy for X, for Y, then over the period we realized that that's not required, it can go for the residential, and it cannot be seen in isolation, it is linked to the larger assembly and larger program of reformation of the energy system in the country, particularly if you look at the solar rooftop. Because if tariffs are with that, the incomes are also different. In what manner you provide with them, whether there is an industry competition with the distribution company, which is generating that. So these needs issues are under ironing stage in the government of India. But nonetheless, there are people who are making a lot of difference in this area. So I'll say that the story is very positive. There is no competition at all. There are stories everywhere in the millions of the numbers across the country. There are gaps also. And this is bound to happen, the system which we are working that where disruptions are taking place at very fast. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll come back to you in a few minutes, but maybe I'll sort of switch the gear a little bit and sort of give in a bit of an international perspective and probably bring in Michael here. So Michael, as we also saw from the presentation that Divya made, that a couple of challenges that are emerging in the DRE job space, while it is opening up jobs in a very significant way. I mean, it's staggering to see that the utility scale solar with a lot of megawatts behind it, or gigawatts rather behind it, is sort of providing same number of jobs which DRE sector in India is providing, and probably an even larger number of jobs when it comes to indirect ones, and the induced ones are even further high. What has been your experience in the international context as you've been looking at some of the socio-economic benefits of renewable energy at different levels and different scales across the globe? What are the, do you see some similarities, do you see some differences in the Indian story vis-a-vis the international story? And particularly if you can also dive in a little bit on the gender dimension aspect, which was also something which was raised in the discussion.
Right. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Yeah, so I should maybe just start off by saying at IRENA we do an annual report on jobs, which looks at both the utility scale and the decentralized situation, and pretty much around the world. So we don't per se single out India or any other country, but we try to actually close the data and information gaps that by and large still exist in quite a few places. And so what we see in the first place is, of course, like in India, there is tremendous take-up of renewable energy. There is this more and more translates now into jobs along the different segments of the value chain. And part of what we do, and I think this is really important to keep in mind, is when you look at the different segments of the value chain, we see that in the segment on manufacturing, manufactured inputs or complete facilities, that is by and large still very much concentrated in mostly in East Asia and a little bit in Southeast Asia. I mean, it used to be that Europe and North America were playing very important roles in this, but China in particular, of course, is the preeminent power, especially in solar power, in solar PV, excuse me. So one could argue in the sense that maybe let's not too much be impressed by what goes on in this part of the segment. Let's look at the opportunities along the value chain. And I think, indeed, when you look at everything from, of course, in the first place, project design, project development, to installation, construction, operations and maintenance, the entire set of activities along the value chain, there are tremendous opportunities for job generation that we see in many, many countries, including in India. And I think this is really what's playing out now in the report that Power for All presented, in CEEW's report. I think this is really what comes out. And I think both of these studies actually expressly say we don't really look at manufacturing. Because if you look at the Indian context, in solar PV, most of the panels are imported. Some of the other elements that you need for these systems are more domestically generated, but by and large, this is the situation as it obtains. And I don't think that it will change dramatically in coming years. Right? I mean, there are, as you probably all know here, there are a variety of efforts in the Indian context to say, well, how do we bring more manufacturing in? But it is not one of the mainstays at this point in terms of the employment generation that we see. And I think particularly to the extent that we look at, so what does this actually mean once we look not so much at the national level or the global level for that matter, if we actually sort of break it down to regions and localities and so on. Clearly the impact that is generated is more in terms of installations, in terms of operations, maintenance, productive uses of course. And I think this is where a number of opportunities come in if we can ensure that the skill building really keeps pace with the need that we actually have the kind of monitoring in place where we understand what are the evolving needs, what kinds of skills are most needed. How can we ensure that the coordination between the education and skills training sector and the industry itself is at a level where we can move forward at the kind of pace that is needed. Right? These are challenges I think in India, but in any other country around the world. I mean, this is the same picture that plays out in slightly different ways, whether it's in Asia or Europe or Latin America. And I think you had asked me also to talk briefly about the gender aspect. So IRENA had in January of this year released a gender report, which was a bit of a culmination of our earlier efforts over the last few years. And what we did was we put out a survey that about 1,500 individuals participated in. These were either people answering on their own behalf, their own experience as people working in the renewable energy sector, or they were answering on behalf of a company or some other organization. And one of the things we found is that in the renewable energy sector as a whole, so this is both decentralized and utility scale, about 32% of the total workforce is women, which compares favorably with when we look at the oil and gas sector globally, where it's about 22%. So that's a significant margin. But of course, we all know that the overall share of women as part of the population, as part of the overall workforce, is higher than 32%. So there is a gap. And I think the gap becomes particularly pronounced once we look at what kinds of jobs are being held by men and women. And I think where we have a long way to go is in terms of the technical jobs, the managerial jobs, where the percentages drop quite significantly, which I think reflects a number of things. And I don't know to the extent that you want me to go into a few of the reasons for that.
Very briefly.
Very briefly. Well, I mean, I think to a large extent what we find in our survey is that long-standing social and cultural norms, of course, play a very significant role. It's basically the sense of what kinds of roles do we expect men and women to fulfill? What kinds of roles can they fulfill in terms of their various responsibilities in society, right? Women are, of course, expected very often, not just to hold a job, but also to be caregivers in families. So their responsibilities are multiple, and it becomes much more difficult, especially against a set of structural reasons and structural restrictions that really hold them back in many, many ways. So I think there are many, many levels at which we need to think far more differently about what's in front of us. Not just in terms of what could women do, but also how can we enable women to do fulfill the kinds of roles that they actually wish to fulfill. One of our findings in the survey was that women look at renewable energy far more favorably in terms of their own career prospects, far more favorably than they would do in terms of a career in oil and gas or let alone coal, right? Because renewable energy by and large is seen as clean, right? It is seen as a social good, it is seen as something that is really forward-looking. So I think there are both needs and opportunities for women to play a much larger role than they have so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And now moving on to Dr. Saxena with you, especially what Michael brought in the skills gap. Like we do see pretty optimistic projections in terms of new employment that will get generated, new employment opportunities that are out there in the coming years for the larger renewable sector and also specifically for the DRE sector in India. But at the same time, the report also highlights the kind of skill gaps that we need to bridge in. The workforce is not as ready. If you talk to a lot of the sector players today, they will say that they need to do in-house training before the workforce is actually able to be put on the job and so on. So what is it that the Skill Council is trying to do on this front? If you're able to highlight some of the recent initiatives or efforts that you're trying to do, which is particularly trying to bridge this skill.
Thank you very much. As far as trainings and skillings are concerned, this is not something related to only Skill Council. In fact, MNRE time immemorial has been doing trainings, and trainings at various levels. We were in MNRE, we started doing with the school curriculum, college curriculum, ITIs, and across the board we have been trying to introduce renewable as the subject. But the biggest step was taken about 4 years back when a separate skill council was created, and it was purely the effort of MNRE in the whole ecosystem to bring a separate skill council which will look into renewable energy specifically. Over these 4 years, the difference which the skill council has made in the whole arena is that we have created standards for training, standards for skilling. So if you look at only solar, for example, and solar and wind, we have about 30 standard qualification packs which are completely aligned to the industry. What industry needs, what kind of skills they require, they expect from the people, those curriculums have been prepared. Not only the curriculums, but we have also been able to affiliate various training partners. There are at the moment about 500 across the country, which are now trained to impart skills. They include ITIs, they include a couple of engineering colleges, a couple of universities actually, and more number is of private players. They have created their small labs as to how to do the skills, because we emphasize on doing rather than knowing. So the most important thing is that there should be a small lab which would train them as to how to do things based on the requirement of industry, and also we have picked up their people to certify the trainers. So we have now training institutions in place, we have trainers which are certified. Over and above that, we also have assessors who are certified, and most of them are drawn normally from industry. It's not always possible, but by and large they are coming from industry as to they know what they are expecting. So this is the overall scenario which has been sort of a platform created in the country in last 4 years, ready to take off for any kind of skills required more so actually I would say in the DRE sectors.
Sir, if I may do a quick follow-up on before you sort of move, drift away from that point. So one of the things that is also emerging from the study is that how the gaps are there across different functional areas, or which functional area are potentially going to create more jobs. Because you see, like, especially in the DRE sector, the sales and marketing and the business side, business development as well as project management are sort of the greater number of jobs that are getting created are much more in these areas than the pure technical installation kind of jobs.
In fact, the output of the study is one, validated what we thought, because most of the time entire industry is focusing on business development. So they need people who would push their business. They are the people who should reach out, and that's the validation we could do from the study, that the maximum number of jobs are expected for the people to push these in different areas, and the business development becomes one of the important things.
But is council trying to work on that skill gap on that front? Yeah.
I'll put it like this. Answer is no, frankly speaking, and I know that you wanted to hear that we have not done that. We have not done that. The answer is no, but equal focus is being given. What is happening is that actually the candidate is more interested in knowing technical. They want to know. For example, the maximum number of trainings done is in a program which is run by MNRE and supported by MNRE, run by Skill Council, and the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana is Surya Mitra, solar PV installer. Everybody wants to become, at least understand how to do it. Once they know that, business development somehow people feel that we will do it. We know how to talk, we know how to push it, but actually that's not true. So we have about 4 qualification packs which are focusing on this. Not much training, but with these results, I'm sure the Skill Council should immediately start focusing on business development. And that also helps us in creating more entrepreneurs. And in rural areas, actually what is emerging now is that the DRE sector would penetrate more. And each local sort of group of area or something like that would need people to percolate the technology. So I'm quite sure that once we have about 58,000 certified Surya Mitras. Now what we are doing to address to the business requirement is pick up once again those. They have acquired technical knowledge. Now bring them back. One, train them on international aspects of it. We are taking help of, for example, GIZ and their trainers. They come there, they train them again, and focus on business development. A little, please give me 1 or 2 more years to
this is not
address that.
Yeah. Alright, thank you, sir. Maybe I'll now bring Vishali in here. Given the industry perspective that you bring in some capacity, but I know that you lead the CSR effort, and it will be also interesting to hear like if there is particular focus on skills or gender gap in your CSR efforts. But also from the industry perspective, how do you see the skill gap? Like what has been your first-hand experience with regards to training of different kinds of functionally employees, be it on the technical side, be it on the project management side, be it on the operations and so on?
Thank you. So a lot has been said about skilling, etc. But let me tell you a little bit about our journey and when we started as a renewable energy company, as an IPP, and this was about 9 years ago. And when we were looking to hire people, there was absolutely a dearth of talent. So in a way, we've been the nursery to bring in people who've been experts in their own respective areas. Traditional areas like finance and lawyers and project management and engineers, etc. So basically, getting a pool of traditional talent and then reorienting them by assigning them projects and learning on the job. So that's been the most effective way for us to be able to do projects effectively and build the company we have. We're generating now close to 6 gigawatts of clean energy. strategy over the last few years. So a lot of in-house training has happened. We've also been a nursery for hiring. So at a corporate level, I think we have done a lot of in-house training. I think a lot of our competitors have also done that. When we went around looking for skilled people, there was nobody out there. But now, with the industry courtesy, the program says policy triggers a lot of entrepreneurs and enterprises, and I think we've seen a lot of that over the years. So, as we speak now, we have companies with skilled manpower, both trained and untrained. If you go on the ground, available to be hired. So there's a lot of hiring going on and etc. But when we look at enhancements, of course, there is scope for skilling and for companies like us. So as I was driving in this morning for this event, I was just sharing with Mr. Saxena, we got a mail from a trust based in UK who does a lot of skilling, and they're looking at India to enter as a market. And what's on top of their mind is renewables. And so they want to work with us to understand what is it that they can do to basically build a program, to train, to kind of make a curriculum for training. And they want to come and do a kind of a one-day workshop with us to understand how we are doing things, what are the gaps, etc. So I would say organizations like us, companies like us, can play a role in hand-holding some of the work which is being done, kind of sharing the gaps which exist, etc. If I look at what we are doing at Renew, we're also engaged in a lot of industry academia partnerships. So we work on the, collaborate with the researchers, etc., to identify new areas and, where work can be done. And as you identify new areas, there's also with that comes the kind of recruitment opportunities and so on and so forth. Just shifting a little bit, I think we also, if we look forward, digitalization is a big theme, I think, which is emerging, AI, etc. I believe that it's going to be critical for our sector, and how we go about doing business is going to change hugely. And that's going to be a huge area for growth. I'd like to bring in the role of gender and how we can engage more women. So if I look at what's going on now, so when I go to a business school to hire, I see a lot of interest from young women to join the renewables. So I guess the women's EQ and wanting to do good things, etc. I have no biases, but that works. Most of the people who we are bringing in actually at that level, a lot of them are women. More women than men. If we also have a program where we hire students from international universities to come in, even there, we have a tough time bringing in men in the program. It's a very small program, but a point being, women are very interested in the sector, but when we look at our mid-level or even top-level management, and I look at the gender ratio in top management, it's non-existent. It's really, I'm not proud of it at all. And so it's a big challenge to bring in women at that level. And this is again traditional skills, lawyers, accountants, project management, HR, etc. I think there's still somewhere some haze around renewables being an infra company, and so some barriers there. So I'd like to do more to change that and get more women in senior positions. And now if I go to the other bucket, which is working in rural India as a part of some of the social responsibility work we do, it's quite encouraging. So 2 years back, we do some rooftops in schools in rural India. We've put up some microgrids in some of the states, usually around the sites where we're doing our work. And so a lady called Kamla came to me, this is 2 years ago, and so we'd gone through the program for a year.
When was this?
When was this? When? Paniara in UP. Yeah. So basically, the bottom line was, school gets a rooftop, her daughter gets good education, we run self-help groups in that facility after school, etc. She sees everything and she says, you know what, I want to not only get my family to enjoy it, but I want to play a role. So she becomes an ambassador, and from that time we've kind of been working mostly with women to be ambassadors to not only convert other women. Women play an important role in kind of ensuring there's engagement with children and with the communities and other women, etc. So in kind of more advocacy and engagement. Of course, there's also learning from countries like Africa, where we've seen programs around distribution, etc. succeed. So women are kind of enthusiastic, and I've seen in rural India when women are determined and they cross the line, and you can really use them as a powerhouse to do a lot. So I think that's a huge area with potential we should also look at. So that is my...
Thanks, Vishali. You have given me a few cues to nicely take the discussion to Rana now, especially given like the international experience that Rana brings in, and also the international community that has now shown significant interest to look at India in many ways, and including renewables. So, what are some of the international best practices you have seen in terms of like how they are dealing with the kind of challenges that we are facing in India? I'm sure like some of these challenges are similar, like not having skilled workforce for renewables in different functions are also there in other parts of the world. So, are there any examples, experiences that you'd like to share from other parts of the world which we can sort of quickly look into and see what kind of inspiration we can take from them to sort of then contextualize them in Indian context?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to take this question as an opportunity to broaden the discussion a bit, because we have the tendency to talk very much about the electricity markets and sector and come from the supply side. So here we're talking about jobs linked to the technologies, installations, etc. And these skill sets need obviously to be built up. However, when we think about what is the role of energy in all our socio-economic activities, so I think it's relevant to 13 out of 17 SDGs, something like this. Electricity is 17% of the total final energy demand compared to heating, cooling, transport, which are 83%. The electricity transition needs to be transformed into an energy transition, and this means basically building up not only the skill sets which are needed already today, but anticipating the skill sets we need tomorrow to make this energy transition work. And here it's some learning, I think, even of countries who are already working, for instance, on advancing renewable energy in the heating and cooling sector, for instance, which encounter, so European examples, which encounter major issues, even though the policy and regulatory frameworks and initiatives are existing here, to find basically installers, etc., who can do the work. And as a result, you have end users who will then turn again to conventional solutions. So I think this is a very meta-learning, but which is very important considering the fact that India is a country where the global community is looking to when it comes to skill setting, where there is opportunity since it's the first country to have a national cooling plan, where there's the whole biogas activities, etc. So I think India has also an opportunity to already basically integrate now in the skill developments these aspects and contribute to show the way. I think that's something. And in this context, for instance, when we're talking about, I think one approach here is we need to change our way of thinking very much and not come as electricity which is only provided, but really analyzing more where energy is being used and where renewable energy can play a role. Because here we're talking, when we're looking into, for instance, the role of renewable energy in cities, we need to work with urban planners, we need to work with architects, and we need to raise their knowledge and awareness for what these renewable energy solutions can bring. When we're talking about bridging renewable energy and efficiency, these are very different types of thinking, and still, unfortunately, globally, communities of silos coexisting more than mixing up. And I think that's something which is important. When it comes to, and that's also something which can be driven by policies. So for instance, in Europe, there are discussions when we're looking into the heat sector, where, and interestingly, these are basically incentives which we know from the energy access sector, for instance, in Africa, result-based incentives. And these result-based incentives can also drive the development of skill developments, opportunities of new, more integrated business developments. Now, on this question of youth and gender, And in general, the perception of renewable energy. I'm going to cite a colleague of mine who's French and said, I grew up with nuclear in the baby bottle. And I think this is exactly what needs to happen when we're talking about sustainable energy and renewable energy. So kids, and this will have a major impact because, so I don't know exactly how the situation is in India, but in many countries, renewable energy today face public acceptance issues. And it starts from the kids' age on. And that's also something which applies to youth and to gender. If young kids are all empowered that they have a role to play in the choices, they will take different action. If women have the understanding that they do not only play a role when we're talking about, and I'll be a bit provocative, nice little solutions in rural areas, but that they are change makers in the global energy transition, we will also find women in other management positions. And Michael said that renewable energy is an opportunity for women. I would really say like women are an opportunity for the energy transition, because the energy transition of tomorrow is distributed, needs another governance structure, and women think differently than men who are in power today.
Thank you.
I mean, I know you have time, but just to take on from what you said, our program in rural India, and so as a part of our foundation, what we do is we install rooftops in schools which have less than 2 hours of electricity. So what it does is, in 45 degrees summer, when a child has to go to a class, it's intolerable. So what we do is bring in a fan at the least, and then also provide an opportunity for them to get some remedial education and then maybe digital education, etc. What we are doing, and as we go about doing that, we are also talking to them about what's going on, the technical kind of using solar energy and the kind of positive impact of that. What that's doing is actually getting them to have a positive experience and actually converting them into ambassadors, not only talking to their grandparents and their parents about it, but again also to more generations when they grow up. So you're actually kind of playing a role in transforming the way the younger generation. So if I could say, when I have kids, when they were young, they were told about Diwali and the labor issues and the pollution issues. They never touched crackers. We used to light boxes of crackers as kids. So, what happens is that if you engage the youth, which is an important part of what Renew does, you can actually have a significant impact on, creating advocates and, kind of building believers, and can play a role in the transition as they grow up. Right?
Thanks, Vishal.
May I just bring one example which I found really interesting? I think it was in in Sweden. The first electric bus stop was installed in a university library, within a university library. And I think that's really some learning which is quite interesting, because it shows, as you said, it shows the impact, but it also creates the attractiveness of these jobs which are linked to this, and making these solutions which have a direct impact on our health, on our social benefits, etc., visible. So I think it's good examples.
Great, Abhishek. Thanks.
Abhishek, before we carry on, just a small announcement. One of you has left your cell phone out on the couch outside. So if you see it missing before panic sets in, just reach out to my colleague Konkanika, she's holding on to it.
All right, thanks. We have about 4 to 5 minutes before we go on to another set of presentations. There are 2 small presentations, and we'll again then open up for the larger audience. But at this point in time, I just wanted, if there are a couple of, let's say, DRE players in the room, and if they would like to share their experiences with regards to skilling, the kind of gaps that they witness. Are there any DRE players in the room? So we have here Boons getting represented. Would you like to just come in and, I'm not putting you on the spot, so it's entirely up to you, but I would like to share some of your experiences with regards to this.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm from Boons. So, as Vaishali ma'am was talking about We have partnered this Panihara site. We have implemented that site. So we are basically a social enterprise, and we are doing all sort of means what we are talking about right now. We are doing it in ground itself. So we have started with SHS, solar home solutions systems, and then right now we are doing a lot of microgrids. We have done microgrids of nearly 40 numbers in UP villages, and Udaipur we are doing mostly solar home solutions. So when you are working on the ground, there are a lot of issues. Means when you are working with a set of you can say customers or probable consumers, then you will have to convince, because they are used to see renewables as a very different set of things. Means they are getting used to see the electricity as a, they found grid electricity, or you can say electricity from fossil fuel as a real electricity. And renewable energy is basically different type of electricity which they don't found interesting enough to move towards that, because they don't feel confident on that. So that sort of, you can say, mindset is there, which you will have to convert them. Means you will have to just go there, visit them, build their confidence on that renewables. So
sorry,
work on that.
I just wanted, if there are specific skilling related experiences that you would like to share, like if the skills is a challenge for your organization, if not, or how have you tackled it? If there's something on that front you would like
to
share.
Sure. Actually, when we started building microgrids, then the first requirement is where you are going to get a rooftop in the small villages. So whenever we started with the microgrids, we have an entrepreneur. We called them as an entrepreneur, where we are going to put our microgrids. So first we go to them. We ask them whether they are interested, and if they are interested, we give them a small sort of training for that, so that they can look after the solar panel, batteries, and all sort of stuff. And that way, we are creating an entrepreneur in that particular village, and they are basically they are the point where the recharges of you can say their things happens. So everybody else, and before going to them, means whenever somebody else is going to them for recharges, so they all get a small, means a general awareness session for solar or renewables. So that's sort of things we started with.
Thank you. Any other individuals? Okay, yeah, please.
Thanks. So I'm Colonel Monish Ahuja, and a slight different perspective moving away from solar or wind. So what we do is bioenergy, and we use the agri-residue value chain. So we create a complete skill set where the farmers work to remove these agri-residue from the fields, and then we create a local market in about 100-kilometer radius. And we utilize this for actual renewable energy, not in terms of electricity. So somebody mentioned, we talked about energy. So we do steam, we do heating, we do cooling, which is off-grid. And we operate boilers. And if you look at thermal equivalent, we do close to about 2,000 megawatt thermal equivalent every day across India, just utilizing biomass, which is agri-residue. So not necessarily in a DRE mode you have to go to the grid, but there are other forms of energy to get utilized. The next step on the value chain, and I do believe the Skill Council is also now working on that, is to utilize this value chain for the biofuels. So when we talked about 87% transportation sector and other areas, that's where this renewable energy now is going to grow. So I think there needs to be a paradigm shift to move away from only putting it into the grid or off-grid into a rooftop for a light or a fan, but the 87% energy is the place to utilize it.
Yeah, but that will be the final question.
So I just wanted to quickly highlight some of the work that we've done with Self-Employed Women's Association. This is on basically looking at solar pumps, figuring out a model for solar pumps for soil farming. And that program is working really well, but what basically was critical, and we've highlighted this in a case study in January, was the skills-based infrastructure that they've created. These skills basically looked at technical skills, financial skills, and leadership skills. In the technical skills, they've sort of created a community of trainers. Each trainer is sort of responsible, master trainer is responsible for a group of trainers who are responsible for pumps and ensuring that these pumps work well. And because they have to keep moving the pumps seasonally, so on an annual basis, they have to go to the salt pans and install them. This has basically worked out really well. And one of the key reasons why the programs worked and is expanding, scaling up, it's now targeting 15,000 pumps in just the little run of Kutch alone. So just wanted to highlight that. And for more information on the skills program, you can read our document. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhura. And yeah, you are next up. So now I invite Madhura, who is representing NRDC today. She leads their work on energy, climate, and many other things. And yeah, over to you, Madhura, before we move on to the next set of discussion.
So that I don't fall down. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for the introduction. Very quickly, I am Madhura Joshi from the Natural Resources Defence Council. I lead the work on energy access, green jobs, and climate policy in India. For those of you who don't know NRDC, we are an international not-for-profit environmental NGO founded in the US in 1970s. We work on science, we use science, policy, and the support of our over 3 million members to find solutions for today's biggest environmental challenges. The India program at NRDC looks at has three major verticals covering a host of issues: finance, access, jobs, cooling, energy efficiency, air pollution, and heat health. On jobs in particular, we've been working with our partners CEEW and SDGs for over 7 years now, and the aim of our research is essentially to support the renewable energy industry and India's energy transition, and also to understand the sort of skills that will be required, not just to meet the current needs, but also the future needs. Here you have a quick snapshot of some of our more recent reports. And today I'll be focusing on our new report, which is called Powering Jobs with Green Energy, copies of which will be available outside and on the table ahead as well. So while doing that analysis, we came across a major finding that in the last 5 years, since 2014, the renewable energy workforce has grown fivefold in the solar and wind sectors primarily. And as Arunabha had mentioned earlier, that as of FY19, there are around 100,000 workers that have been employed in the solar and wind sectors alone. Going back. But rooftop solar, I know that it's really tiny, so you can't read. The dark blue is rooftop solar, light blue is utility scale, and green is wind. Rooftop solar with just less than 4 gigawatts of installed capacity has actually employed the highest number of people in the sector, even compared to utility scale solar and wind. However, the slowdown in capacity addition in FY19 over FY18 has had an impact on the employment created in the sector. For instance, if you see, I've used the example of only utility scale solar over here. The capacity addition in FY19 was roughly 30% lower than that in FY18, and the employment effect over here was also tremendous. New additional employment created in FY18 was roughly 12,400 workers, which fell to roughly 3,000 workers in FY19. This is new employment generated in the sector. Similar trends are also seen in wind and utility scale solar. Wind has seen multi-year low capacity installation in the last 2 years, which has impacted the employment in the sector. The new workforce created in FY18 was around 30,000 jobs with around 11.2 gigawatts of installed solar and wind capacity. This reduced to around 12,300 jobs for around 8.8 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity in FY19. However, there's been significant developments in the trainings imparted in this trainings imparted through the various programs. Between FY16 and FY19, over 58,000 workers have been trained through various programs of the Skills Council. And our study suggests, this was also based on our FY 2017 report, based on surveys, that if we were to achieve, India was to achieve the 175 gigawatts target, over 330,000 jobs would be created in the solar and wind sectors alone. That's roughly 230,000 between now and 2022 just on meeting the solar and wind targets. So to conclude, 5 top-level recommendations that we had for this report is increasing the share of DRE projects in the energy mix in India, because the ratio of large-scale solar projects, large-scale projects and DRE projects that we deploy now will determine the amount of employment that we create. Second is to ensure year-on-year renewable energy growth, that year-on-year capacity addition is at least the same, if not higher, every year on. Support local training centers, particularly in rural areas, to create local workforce, have the kind of workforce required for developers, as well as to spur local entrepreneurs. The 4th recommendation is to increase reporting from renewable energy companies across the value chain, so that it helps in ensuring that the skill development programs match the needs, spurs the market growth, as well as helps political support over time, and produce domestic solar module manufacturing industry in the country. This basically was based on our 2017 report, which highlighted that if solar modules required for 100 gigawatts of installed solar capacity was manufactured in India, it would create close to 45,000 jobs. Now moving on ahead to another report by our partners, Skills Council and CEEW, that basically looks at the net employment the net employment effect in the power sector. Their analysis is based on 3 scenarios, which is essentially the INDC scenario, reference scenario, and ambitious scenario. And basically it shows that the employment effect on the employment increases in the INDC scenario throughout the various years. However, in the ambitious scenario, the jobs created are slightly lower than that in the reference scenario, primarily due to loss in coal mining activities. However, this is not covered in this analysis. If the share of DRE increases in the ambitious scenario looks at deep decarbonization, then the jobs created can be significantly higher. The scenarios are based on a TERI 2018 projections. This looks at the impact on coal mining activities in particular. Obviously, in the INDC, in the ambitious scenario, the coal mining activities go down because of higher focus on renewable energy. In the ambitious scenario, it's almost 50% lower than the reference scenario because higher share of RE, but also higher mechanization of coal mining activities to begin with. With this, I invite Sharija to come and present the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhura. Having discussed the general employment trends in the RE sector, I would like to now move on to an in-depth case study which we did with the International Energy Agency on women's involvement in the rooftop solar sector. The value proposition here is that India's RE targets give us the opportunity to meet the SDG 5 and 8 along with the SDG 7. Through our interviews, we covered a major proportion of the project developers and EPC in the sector, and we find that women account for an estimated 11% of the workforce in the rooftop solar sector in India. Although this is slightly higher than the traditional oil and gas industry, this is far less than the global average, as you mentioned, Michael, which is 32%. This is also less than India's women's workforce participation in the non-farm sector, which is 19%. Also, if you look at the professional sectors of IT, communications and finance, they have a far greater participation of women, almost 30%, which comes from the number of women in engineering institutes in India, which is also quite high as compared to the OECD countries, which is again 30%. Moving on, we also tried to understand women's participation across the value chain of rooftop. We find that in the corporate segment, which is HR, finance, legal, there are far more women, but in the core business segments of the rooftop solar, there is much lesser participation of women. Interestingly, pre-design and construction has almost 20% women, and we find that this is by the virtue of the job being more office-based, while O&M and construction and commissioning have less than 5% women. Now, if we want to increase women's participation in the entire value chain, it's important to increase women's participation in construction and commissioning and O&M. NRDC and CEEW's report also mentions how more than 50% of the job in the rooftop solar comes in the construction and commissioning, which makes it far more important to have more women there. If we look at women's participation by position, the same story is repeated, where there are more women in leadership position in the corporate segment, which is like the last part, which is almost 30%, while across the value chain there are only 12% women in senior management positions and 17% in mid-management positions. In terms of board, women in board of directors, in the companies that we spoke to, only 1/3 of them had at least one woman in their board of directors, but none of them had more than one woman. To understand the existing barriers and support for involvement of women in the sector, we use the Gender at Work framework, which looks at 4 dimensions. First is the access to opportunities available to women, the formal policies and procedures, the individual consciousness of employees at workplaces, and the norms and practices at the workplaces. Now, this tries to look at the barriers and support from both individual, company level, and the society level. While we have discussed all of them in detail in our report, which you can access on our website, I would like to touch upon some of the key points. The first is the adverse perception of safety and security at during the site visits have been cited continuously by the women to be one of the biggest barriers. Now, interestingly, women who are in the core segments have mentioned that this is more of a perception and that's not the reality. And because site visits form such an integral part of the core segment jobs, this becomes a major barrier for women to be in these segments. While this is the case, we've seen that some of the organizations have extended a lot of support in terms of providing safe accommodation, travel, and having male colleagues accompany female colleagues. Additionally, in terms of formal policies and procedures, we saw that a lot of companies mentioned how investors play a very important role in mandating of gender goals in the company for having, like, let's say 10% of the workforce, 20% of the workforce has to be women. To improve the participation of women in the sector, we have come up with some recommendations. For companies adopting progressive and flexible work policies, learning from the sectors which have a greater participation of women could be one good way. And employee sensitization through trainings and conversations to make a more empathy-driven work culture. For investors, lending requirements could mandate gender audits and gender goals of having diversity in the workforce. And for policymakers, designing more gender-inclusive policies rather than women-centric policies. For instance, not having instead of having a maternity leave, probably having a compulsory parental leave would be a good measure. And incentivizing companies and investors to have more gender diverse workforce. Thank you. I would like to tell Abhishek to get the discussion.
Thank you, Shani. So we have about 15 minutes or so before we wrap up. And I would now like to sort of open it up to everyone in the room. Please feel free to participate and bring up your views, questions, and so on. But I'll sort of put 3 guiding questions for us to think about some of these challenges which are related to gender when it comes to their participation in the work area and workforce in general, but here we are specifically looking at renewable energy, so to say. So one of the things is like, what are the challenges which exist that why these companies are not able to create specific policies around it? Even if, let's say, there are awareness out there on these issues. And of course, we can say that awareness itself is probably very limited, but if the awareness is there, what are the other material barriers? And I would love to hear from some of the companies themselves in the room, that what are the barriers that you are facing when you think about developing such gender inclusive policies? And I mean, once these are out there, it will be much easier for us as an ecosystem to address some of those going forward. The second thing is that, again, maybe some of the international practitioners in the room can help us learn a little bit here. Like, what are the best practices that we have seen in other parts of the world to make a more gender inclusive workforce come into the space? So we'd love to hear maybe from Rana, from you and others in the room, that if there are some interesting experiences to share. And the third bit is a little bit on the policy side again, that what is it that the policymakers can do in order to ensure a more gender inclusive workforce? And I would like to stretch this a little bit, policymakers at one side, but also looking at the commercial side of the policymakers, which are investors, who do dictate a lot of culture in many of the companies and so on. So if there are some investors in the room, or companies can share experiences in terms of interactions with their own investors, that how do investors can actually push the agenda for further on this. So it's an open house now. Please feel free to come in. Okay, we have someone here.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashwini from WRI, and thank you everyone for all your inputs, and it was a really interesting presentations and discussion. So my question is, I think very lightly someone might have touched upon, but largely what about the quality of jobs? And this also means how much of long-term jobs or permanent jobs is compared to short-term contractual. I think that also would probably incentivize more people to join the renewable world. So are there any sort of studies or insights on that?
Let's collate a couple of comments and then we'll come back.
Thank you so much for the very interesting session. My question is going back to the Power for All presentation, where there was a noticeable amount of jobs in the informal sector. Now, the challenge with the informal sector is benefits, policies, actually reaching the people. So, what is it that research organizations or perhaps corporates are thinking about in terms of making the informal sector as formal as possible, but not taking away the autonomy that it comes with?
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's one here and then Neha. Maybe Rakesh first and then Neha.
Hi, I'm Rakesh Jha from Minnesota Advisors. On skill, we had also conducted a study, and therein we tried to map the entire value chain of especially DRE, including mitigate also. And in the process, we conducted survey with lots of companies into this sector. And through our experience of working on different projects, I can also comment on the gender imbalance in the skill aspects of DRE. While I was working on one of the major solar parks in India, I don't want to name it, but therein we interacted with a couple of women folks who were working there as laborers. And we were complaining that there is no sanitation facility, there is no separate washroom facility for these women folks over there. So we are expecting that they would come forward, they will leave their homes, they will go, they will migrate somewhere out. but basic hygiene facility is not provided, so maybe that is one of the causes. Second, when we interacted, we came to know that in order to get engaged for the long term, and especially when you're eyeing better returns from the job that you're trying to do, you're supposed to migrate, you have to go out of home. And this is slightly tough for women folks to shift their base. So this is why personally, wherever I've worked, I've seen that for a small stand-alone solar systems kind of O&M, you still have women folks and lots of organizations, especially women-focused organizations, they have been working very well. But when it comes to utility scale or mitigated scale kind of project, you have limitations of these kinds. So something I'm looking forward that policymakers and the companies, they will provide some insight into this.
Very interesting perspective, Rakesh, there. Neha.
Hello, my name is Neha Kumar. I work with Climate Bonds Initiative. Thank you for a very engaging discussion. I have 2 points. First of all, to begin with, that I think that in the clean energy transition, besides access to greater amount of finance, I think jobs will be the most critical area which will drive the growth, as well as raise concerns if the transition is not just in terms of social inclusion as well as gender participation, as we just talked about. I'm intrigued. Coming on to the gender part of it and inclusion of women, I'm intrigued that most of the data points that we discussed today are actually also the data points of the traditional sectors. There is not enough women inclusion in all of those sections that we discussed today. So my question is that, is there anything specifically unique to this sector which actually drives women to participate or can be looked at to include women more and more? So what is that unique quality of that sector, of this sector, which can be, which should be thought through as a driving force? And second question is to all the panelists and somebody else. In the segment where the skilled workforce is required, I wonder what is the proportion of people substituting the jobs, old people working in traditional sectors who already have the skill base and moving to this sector, to the new workforce inclusion and generation. So these 2 are my points in question.
Right. Thank you. Pausing in here just to get some reactions and comments, and we'll come back to you. So who's want to pick up and respond to some of these before we look at new questions? So if you're having a response, please go ahead. If it is a new question, I'll request you to pause. Shihar, is there a response there? Yeah. Please.
Hi, so my name is Shifali. I'm a gender advocate in Renewable Energy, and I do numerous projects. Had the opportunity to see a lot of this work in the field, both here in India and internationally. And I think just wanted to reiterate Neha's point about what makes it really unique and special, and why are women an opportunity for this sector. And I think that's a great point to look at something specific, but I think it's also important to accept that, as you rightfully say, these are issues that are rampant throughout the workforce, and solving it, having that mandate to solve it, and giving that intent of the mandate to solve it in our sector is in a way special enough. On the other hand, what we do see is the fact that there is an EQ, or that there is a propensity for women to be driven towards the sector, often gets sidelined as a soft point, as something that women want to do something nice, and so this is a cute little job that they're going to do. And I think really valuing that point, that our passion and our drive and our determination, as was earlier said, is really a value proposition for the sector. And then just to comment on your point, Abhishek, about what are some of the challenges that companies have, I think in all of the really great reporting that's being done on skills, and you see that being done internationally, and in fact, you see it as a political will, right? Jobs, has actually pushed people from parties who are strong supporters of the oil and gas industry to support renewable energy in their states or in their political constituencies, because it drives votes, right? It outweighs. So I think when we look at it, when we look at capturing those skills, we also have to think about we also have to think about, how many companies actually have that mandate, right? And capture that in our skilling, because if that intent, again, is not there, then our ability to reach that goal is probably also going to be stunted.
Thanks. Sherry, do you have a response to anything, please?
So just trying to explain better on why this sector could be a boon for having more women in the renewable energy. First is because it's emerging and new. So we have the opportunity to fix that gender balance, which we didn't do probably in the traditional sector. Secondly, especially in terms of rooftop solar, I think the site visits, which was constantly quoted as one of the biggest barriers, the site visits are still much more accessible. These sites are much more accessible than the traditional oil and gas. So if we try and overcome this adverse perception, there's a huge opportunity for more women to come into this sector and have a greater balance.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to, the question you raised, that what's unique, why should women be attracted to the sector? One reason for women to think about this is because they're going to be the biggest victims of the climate change, kind of issues, whether it's migration, flooding, drought, so on and so forth. It's important for them to kind of, write their own future. And in the remote areas, we need to get women in the workforce. Women do migrate, they go to the cities. You don't see women workers moving from a village to another part in search of a job. And I think security is a concern for most women. We see that in our site. We have, I think, just 2 women employees in the site. So can we make the workplace more convenient? Sanitation, etc. is very important. Also security. And if I could be brave enough to say that men need to think about this a little bit. What is it that they can do to make the environment more secure for women to be able to do what they can in this sector remotely?
It's true that we are not finding many women to participate in our skilling programs as well. But to the corporates, I personally feel that if rooftop is to be taken as an example, where you have to penetrate to the houses, if we offer a little more salaries to the girls, probably they can definitely penetrate better in the houses and convince people than young boys. They have a better factor of reliability attached to them. So I think that should be definitely encashed. Also, that should be compensated. So if the industry can feel that, probably things could have a little better shape.
Anyone who would like to comment on the quality of jobs and the informal job bit that was raised? Do you have a point on that? Okay. You want to talk about the quality of jobs bit? Yeah, please.
Yeah, just briefly, I think it's really important because when you look at the studies that exist, including ours at Arena and also I think the Power for All, by and large the attention of course always goes to the numbers of jobs, right? And that's fine. I think we need to be concerned with numbers in a world that keeps growing population-wise and in other ways. But it's interesting to me when I think about the discussion in-house at Arena, and I can say this because I think I'm the only Arena employee here, we still actually have to struggle in-house to say it's not just the numbers, it is the quality. It is what is the quality of the workplace, which relates to what goes on in a particular company or in a particular situation between the formal sector, the informal sector, but also what is it with pay levels, right? What is it, the pay gap between men and women, the glass ceiling, all of these kinds of questions. Because ultimately, if we can say we have a job that pays better, that brings more respect to people, that lasts longer, I think the multiplier, the socio-economic multiplier, the benefit is so much larger. So a job does not equal a job.
Okay, thanks. And then Rana, please. Okay, either ways.
Just because it's right away in response to what Michael said and the informal sector, we are probably all in agreement that the energy transition, policies and regulatory frameworks are key. And there is obviously, in terms of developing stable and formal jobs, I think this is fundamental, the quality, but also structurally in an ecosystem, it is important that the energy transition does not rely on the informal sector only, because policy and regulatory frameworks are very difficult to apply to these sectors. And we do see in many countries actually, whether it is I'll say like the diesel mafia in Lebanon or the biomass, traditional biomass mafia in East Africa. Okay, mafia is maybe a bit strong, so that unfortunately policy and regulatory framework cannot change the realities here, but which are real economic realities and are main hindrances in moving towards renewable energy and efficiency. So
thank you. Just taking in, sorry, and there was one point there at the back which I would like to take it first. Then there was a WRF point here. And probably we'll have to stop at around that. I'll see if I can give in one more perspective. Please, sir.
Yeah. My name is Vidud. I'm a consultant. My question is, how do pay scales compare with the oil and gas industry where renewables are concerned? And how would the oil and gas personnel which would be developed, could they be absorbed in the renewable space after training if necessary?
Two points. One on the quality part. We did a study a couple of years back on the renewable energy and what kind of jobs and what is the basically about what are those kind of duration plus quality and different aspects around the ecosystem. So it's up there in our website. So I'm happy to share as well if anybody is interested. And on the overall jobs perspective, I think there is still a silo even within the global organizations who are coming up with the jobs report in the renewable energy sector. It is not linked with the overall energy transition, because ultimately it is about the transition, and for developing country like India, transition is not a question of replacing renewable with fossil fuel with renewables, because it has its own problems of the grids and various other ecosystem problems. So within that segment, how these jobs are actually going to have a net effect on the total job creation is going to be an interesting idea to study as well.
Yeah, this sort of links to the point that Neha also raised, like, are there additional jobs or how much is the substitution?
But we are not using the narrative of the transition, because in the context of India as well.
It's a very different narrative.
When we talk about 175 gigawatts, it's only the RE stage. We don't talk about Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, what is in there for, because that will also create the jobs in there.
Indeed. Yeah, thanks. Ma'am, you first and then we'll...
Two points I want to make. One is that we need to have more, just to reinforce that we need to have more women-friendly policies, both at the government level and at the companies. And these need to be implemented. Making policies is just one thing, implementation also needs to be done. And second, there should be a support at the middle level. You see, we have a class ceiling at the top. We have very few, 22% women are there at the top in all the roles across the country or across international, So there has to be more support at the middle level. Dropouts in the career are at the middle level, when the woman has to take on more responsibilities of the family, whether she is in a rural home or she is in the urban area. So these are my 2 points that we need to have. Thank you very much.
First the simple and then there's another hand there and then
I'm Uttam Talapatra. Just add something to what sir said just now, that regarding the training part of it for women. Like working in my previous company where we have been implementing rooftops and also ground-mounted solar projects. Sometimes we go out to the National Power Training Institute for giving out lectures and for campus recruitment and all. I was shocked to find, I go personally, shocked to find that there are no girls. I mean, this thing, it has to be made a movement that girls have to come into, don't be scared of electricity. We would also like to offer more salary to girls who would join us. There is one more area which, I mean, possibly this whole gathering has not yet touched upon. We are talking about marketing skills, we are talking about selling the whole idea of solar energy and renewable energy. We are talking about how to install them, how to put them up. Who is thinking about operation and maintenance? Now, that is one area which I believe is the next business area. Because you have solar panels mounted all across the country over hectares and square kilometers, which have a life cycle of 25 years, guaranteed life cycle. And India is a dusty country, and there is a shortage of water all around. How do you keep those panels clean, and how do you generate the electricity that it's supposed to generate?
Sure.
So those are operation maintenance areas are also where girls can do wonderful work, especially on the SCADA systems.
Sasmita, then Anjali. Okay, we still have a lot of interest in the room. Do we have a mic here, for Sasmita? Yeah.
On the quality of jobs that we were talking about, and quality of jobs is both a supply and a demand problem. So we have to find ways of converging a lot of these interventions. For example, the skills training need to also make people aware about the labor rights that exist in the country. A lot of these times we just talk about the technical aspects of the job and not the kind of rights that are around it. Secondly, the power of collectives. We have not leveraged in our country's power of collectives like farmer cooperatives or labor unions. These are very strong ways to get people to demand good quality jobs and also balance employer-employee relationships. So I think using some of these existing systems to bring in better quality and better rights will help us get better.
Thank you, sir. Anjali. Yeah, I will come to you in a minute. Anjali.
Thank you. Anjali from the International Finance Corporation. Actually, my question, or I would say comment, is also an extension of what was just said. So, there was almost a significant percentage of jobs coming from sales and distribution. And those are exactly the companies that we work with at IFC. These are companies who have created thousands of jobs on the ground. The biggest issue that they face actually is attrition. And attrition not because of lack of skills or training, attrition because the income that they generate from the work that they get by working with one or two companies is not enough and it's not worth the time, and that's the feedback that we get from them. So the question or something that I would want to actually hear from others, if there's any experience, is how do we really help them connect to some of the other companies. At least in IFC, what we're trying to see is how can we leverage some of our other sector work. So, can we bring agriculture, other manufacturing, dairy cooperatives and help them increase their income by becoming entrepreneurs for those products as well. So, if there are any experiences, we would really like to learn from them.
Thank you. So,
the suggestion here, the payments of the salaries to the workforce, which we are trying to quantify, is through the banking system. And we are also talking about gender diversity, we are talking about rural employment. Since that is mapped through the banking system, the companies in the energy space could have a return filing where the gender diversity gets quantified with what amount is paid to how many people, what is the job which is there, the attrition rates can also get mapped. And data speaks for itself. So you're talking about reports which you have done and you have gone to companies. It could be vice versa where the reports get filed and then it's there in public domain. And that would give impetus to what work is being done by multiple countries globally.
Yeah, very interesting suggestion there. So you had something to say? Yeah, please. I think limited to renewable energy companies. This can be across the board.
I said energy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have just 3-4 points. One, start about jobs. Indeed, jobs are increasing. Indeed, it is directly linked with the deployment. Indeed, if automation is more, jobs will be lesser and lesser over the period for the centralized. More jobs will be for the decentralized. These are the known facts, and it is directly proportional to the numbers which goes on the ground. Decentralized will be more on the side where it is rooftop and others and access. Specific to the gender-based jobs, it is not only the job, the another dimension is the opportunity cost which has been created to the renewables. Particularly if you go for cooking and other systems, either to four, if you are going for the biomass-based cooking to the switched over to the clean cooking, what opportunity cost has been created to the woman in the houses, that and what alternative opportunities for the other kind of jobs that needs to be mapped. That is one of the major areas that has to be seen. So this is not the direct, but indirectly renewables are impacted, creating a lot of opportunities for women, particularly in the rural settings, whereby they have created the opportunity for other kind of jobs, which time they have used to spend for the biomass and other waste activities. Some of the suggestions are like the manufacturing has to be created in India for that. These are the obvious things, which is basically, and if I say something as expected to speak from a person from MNRE that the plans are there that by 2030 if you go for the 500 gigs of the renewables, then one can pretty well understand that what is the domain it is moving at. Now again I say that there is nothing sort of that what is DRE versus centralized. It has to be equally for all. The way what is the best gives the best economic options for the country. Policies needs to be tweaked according to that and looked for that perspective. Women has a major share in the decentralized renewables in the past, traditionally also. If we look at the example of the Barefoot, Telonia, I have seen that the women from Africa and other places are working in India as well as in their countries, and they make the best of the ambassador for that also. In a nutshell, this is neither time for trumpeting what we have done nor for preaching what has to be done, but what is the best possible pathway we have to adopt that. And it has to be emergent, looking at the situation and moving ahead. And policy precisely means that what government has been doing to the extent. There are limitations, of course, and there is nothing which can be seen as an isolation. In specific to the jobs and others, Mr. Saxena was mentioning that there are two kind of things. One is for horizontal jobs, another is the vertical. Horizontal jobs, he does that. We have been doing it from the curriculum to the IITs to the diploma. Everywhere renewable is present here as a seed. It is not so that we are creating, because I have seen people coming and sitting in the ministry that, sir, we got the Suryamitra certificate or a skill certificate, we are not getting to do something. So it should not lead to kind of a captivity syndrome that he is a man of renewable and somebody is not picking out, Renew is not picking or FC is not picking, then he is sitting in the ministry's corridors and saying that give me a job. It should have as much as diversified possible. That is another thing. One should never forget that in the quest for creating jobs for renewables, what are the after effect or the counterproductive? It can be in certain stages be counterproductive also, if we are not looking for the horizontal jobs in that expense, in that perspective. Shivani is here from WRI, and I'll quote that some of the major things for the State of World report they used to say, and this may be one of the best of the summing up for the sustainability of the 7 and others, that adjust economy of scales, which is really required for the renewables and all these things. That's one. Second, what is the growth versus development? The shift from growth to development, which is the key word for the developing countries for like us. Commons has to be managed in the proper fashion. Commons means that our biomass chain and others, which Mr. Ahuja has mentioned, that is one of the most important things. Development led with the innovation, because more innovation at the local level, it will be better for the renewables, and which we have seen at many places. I quoted example of a remote village there as well as in Ajanta. They are the local innovations. It is not a great thing, but that really tweak the technologies at the local requirements, and that always worked. What government can do? Create a kind of framework where these are possible. Not make some kind of the rigid kind of the courses that if you have not done this X or Y, then it will not work in this. From Kerala to Kanyakumari to Jammu, same can't work at all. Simply, this is our experience sitting in the ministries, that what kind of issues comes from the X and Y part of that. Undoubtedly value women in the entire value chain. That is one of the basic tenets of the sustainability, but in the perspective, not the pampering. it has to be done with the equal footing, that not treat them as if they are somewhere male esteem. They should be equally fighting for their space in the Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good to hear those final words from government authority. And probably, sir, you've done my job to summarize a lot of the nuances that has come up in the discussion. So I'll not spend time to summarize them again, but I'll just invite Arnabha to sort of close the session. And thank you all, not just the lead discussants who are amazing in terms of the insights that we got, but also the very active participation that we see from the room. And let's continue the discussion as we close the session and move towards lunch.